You are watching live coverage of the Mackinac Policy Conference here on One Detroit. So thriving cities are just this essential part of any state economy, right? You need it to attract talent, to grow population, and sustain, again, the economy. So two folks who think about this day and night are Richard Florida, founder of the Creative Class Group, and Rip Rapson, president and CEO of the Kresge Foundation. Welcome to you both. Thanks for making the time.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So Richard, your name, Richard Florida, I think has been a large part of the Mackinac Policy Conference for years and years. But for someone who is new to your work and who's, not sure exactly about what it means to be a urbanist, talk to folks about just a little bit about what your thinking is about when it comes to cities and growth.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when cities were taken for dead. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. I saw that city decline and decay and go into the abyss. And then over the past really 20 years, cities have come back in a powerful way. And my work's been about what are the economic factors that make cities attractive? How do they attract talent? What is it about them and the kinds of talent they attract? And now most recently with the rise of remote work, it's kind of a third phase. Is remote work going to lead to the end of cities? I argue no.
Yeah.
How's it going to affect cities and what's going to happen to downtown? So I just feel fortunate to be able to do this work.
What's the pitch for strong cities? If someone's, lives in a rural area and is going, oh, city life, it's not for me. What's the economic incentive?
Well, actually, one of the things Rip and I have been talking about a lot here and before here is that one of the things that's really interesting about America, but even more interesting about Michigan, is that you have a portfolio of places. There are some people, young people, empty nesters, some with families that love gritty urban environments. There are other people who like a walkable suburb. Still other people, like we're looking right out at a lake, who like to be in a lakefront community. And I think one of the interesting things about Michigan is it has something for everybody. And, we know Americans break down. There are urbanites, there are suburbanites, there are ruralites. And we're not, but the other thing that I find fascinating is sometimes people change. Sometimes you're an urbanite when you're young, and maybe you want to go to a suburb when you get older. And maybe when you're older, you lived in a suburb, you want to go back to an urban area. So I think it's not just about making cities great, it's about making all of our places as the best they can be.
How does that speak to you, Rip?
Well, I think one of the fascinating parts of Richard's report that he released today is the importance of places that are authentic, historic, and have a trajectory of opportunity. And I think one of the things that all of the cities of Michigan have in different ways is those components. So Detroit has this enormous possibility of becoming an international center of mobility. Traverse City has an enormous set of opportunities around nature and environment and small downtowns. Ann Arbor.
Craft brewing.
Yeah, indeed. A little bit too much of that, probably. But Ann Arbor has the possibility of really stretching what it means to be a great urban university-serving city. On and on and on. And I think one of the things that we at Kresge have tried so hard to establish is that the building blocks from place to place to place aren't terribly different. They're good education, there are good opportunities to experience the environment, there are places where diversity and inclusion become paramount, on and on and on. And I think what the report suggests is that those things are in place, ready to go, and we're ready to take advantage of them.
Well, let's talk about the report. And I want to read the first line at the executive summary, which is, Michigan is at a historic inflection point. I mean, this is what we're talking about at this conference. It sort of feels like we have this opportunity to decide which direction we're going to go in.
Well, it's so interesting. My dad worked in a factory in Newark, New Jersey. I know a lot about manufacturing, working class kid. And for years, manufacturing our country was deindustrializing. And, although I think cars are interesting and fascinating, for a lot of people, this thing, your computer, an iPhone, these new technologies were fascinating. But what's happening in Michigan is the car is changing. It's no longer my dad's car or my car. It's a car powered by a battery, doesn't have an internal combustion engine. It is connected. It's smart. It's an app that you download. It rides on a smart road. But the interesting thing is that Michigan is probably the most well-positioned place of any place in the world. It can do a first. No other region that I know of in history, if they lost the textile industry, they had to go to a new industry. If they lost steel in Pittsburgh, where I live, they had to go to robots. Michigan could actually do a first as the car changes, become the leader in that. And what the report talks about is what it needs to do. And what's interesting, Obviously, it needs to develop the technology, do the electrification and the digitalization and all of that. It needs to make sure it has the talent, the kids coming out of the great universities in electrical engineering, computer engineering, chemical engineering for batteries. But what was so fascinating that wouldn't have happened 20 or 30 years ago, to do that, it needs great places. I mean, that's what's sort of interesting about it. It's not just about the technology and the talent. Those are critical. But to do that, you need to have great places that people want to be. And that's what the report talks about, how Michigan can put that all together and align it.
So there's been a lot of conversation about population, talent growth. President Santo Ono of the University of Michigan talks a lot about needing, I like how he's been phrasing it this week, we need it to be sticky. We need to keep people here. So we're talking a lot about this issue, but in your report, you actually say that it is a myth that Michigan does not retain talent. So explain, are we not talking, like, what's the dichotomy here?
No, and actually, when you parse it, there's no contradiction.
Okay.
So Michigan has been losing population. It's not been attracting enough people from the country. It's not been attracting enough international immigrants. So Michigan, actually, when you look at the retention of college graduates for 2- and 4-year institutions, it ranks 7th in the country. New York does a little better. California does a little better, but it's not in the bottom. When you look at communities that retain, and this is based on LinkedIn data, it's a few years old, but I think it's pretty good, done by a guy named Jonathan Rothwell, who was at Brookings, now at Gallup. Detroit ranks first in retaining every youngster from a 2- and 4-year institution. Well, a lot of kids go to community college. They go to regional college. They go to state university. But, and this is an important but, Michigan does awful at attracting talent from other states. It's near the bottom in most metrics, not necessarily always at the bottom, but always in the bottom 10 or 5. And, about the University of Michigan and President Ono, even though Michigan retains a lot of the kids coming out in 2-year, 4-year institutions, when it comes to those kids in computer science, electrical engineering, artificial intelligence, software engineering coming out of the University of Michigan, too many of those kids leave for opportunity on the West Coast and elsewhere.
And I was fascinated in that part of report, not just because I live in Ann Arbor, but I was fascinated because I guess I would have thought, right, that folks graduate from U of M, and if they're going to stay, but so what is that? What is the city of Ann Arbor? Detroit's doing great, like you say.
So I learned this because I taught at Carnegie Mellon University for 20 years. And very few of our computer science or electrical engineering kids stayed in Pittsburgh. They all moved to a place like Austin, Texas. And one of the things the report says is they prefer a college town. These kids in software engineering, computer engineering, all these tech fields aren't big city. Some are. But they like college towns. They're manageable. They're nice. They're lovely that we're familiar with. Ann Arbor actually outperforms Austin on every metric. It has a larger concentration of what I call the creative class, scientists, engineers, innovators. It has a larger concentration of college graduates. To my mind, a more interesting place to live. But the kids don't stay. So one of the arguments in the report is take the lessons of Kresge, of Detroit, of placemaking, and let's start to apply them. Let's work with President Ono. Let's work with Michigan State. Let's work with others to bring placement, to combine placemaking in the university towns and to help them become communities of choice for these young kids. And I think that's not a hard thing to do. It's already happening. We just hope we can kind of give that a little additional energy.
Rip, how does that resonate with you? I see you nodding.
Well, I think the possibility of using our university systems, and it's not just the big research institutions, it's the community colleges, it's the regionals, it's the privates. But I think it's ultimately an opportunity for them to be a full participant in community building. And I think we're beginning to see that with the University of Michigan, I think the University of Detroit Mercy, other places. So my hope is that in the future, we're going to see a huge sort of next generation of work that universities plow into making our urban places better places.
And we don't think of this as an either or. Like one of the things I talk about in the report, it's not like Austin versus Dallas. Austin's growth fuels Dallas. Look at the Palo Alto area, which started Silicon Valley. Palo Alto grew around Stanford, fueling the Silicon Valley, San Francisco. It wasn't Boston that became a tech hub, it was Cambridge. And the best one is Boulder. Boulder's growth around the University of Colorado fueled Denver's rise as a tech hub. So one of the things we've been talking about that I find so fascinating is maybe there's a corridor. As this grows, it's not just Ann Arbor as a thing and Detroit as a thing in East Lansing. Maybe there's a transit connect, whatever it is. I'm not here to dictate that or to outline that, but some way to make this part of a regional system that could really work for all of them.
It's fascinating. And Rip, you're doing the work in Detroit. Thank you to you both for the time and for the thoughtfulness behind all of this as we look at sort of what this next economic growth is going to look like. That's Richard Florida, founder of the Creator Class Group, and Rip Rapson, president and CEO of the Kresge Foundation.